I fought back against my family's schemes and ended up being the one who came out on top. My mom had both hands on the envelope like it was a gift and not a weapon, sliding it across the kitchen island toward me while my dad stood behind her with his arms folded in that "we've already decided" expression. The paper made a soft, scraping sound over the stone bench top, and I swear my stomach recognized it before my brain did. Same feeling as being handed a report card you didn't know existed. My brother Dean was perched on a bar stool, bouncing his knee, trying to look casual, but his eyes kept flicking to my hands like he was waiting to see if I'd flinch. "Just sign it," Mom said lightly, the way you tell someone to sign a birthday card, not a document that could ruin your life. I didn't touch it. I stared at the envelope, then at her fingers, then at my dad's jaw working like he was chewing anger. "What is it?" I asked, and my voice came out thinner than I wanted. Dad said, "It's to help the family. Don't make it a thing." I picked the envelope up anyway because I couldn't help myself, curiosity and dread are cousins, and pulled the papers halfway out. The top page had a bank logo. My throat tightened instantly. Loan application. Personal guarantee. My name typed neatly in a box like someone had already pictured me as collateral. I felt my pulse hit my fingertips. "You want me to guarantee a loan?" I asked, and Dean finally stopped bouncing his knee, leaning forward as if the momentum could push me into yes. Mom's smile stayed put, but her eyes sharpened. "It's not like that," she said too fast. Dad cut in, "You've got good credit. We don't. Banks are ridiculous these days." He said it like the bank was the problem, not the fact that they'd driven their finances into a ditch and now wanted me to tow them out with my name. Dean chuckled, trying to soften it. "It's literally just a formality," he said, like that sentence had ever been true in the history of forms. I set the papers down carefully, like they were hot, and said, "No." It was a Thursday night, about 9 months earlier, when my dad first floated the idea of me helping in a way that didn't sound like help at all. We were at my parents' place for dinner. Same kitchen, same island, same fluorescent downlights that make everyone look tired and slightly sweaty. And Dad was talking about the business like he always did, half bragging, half complaining. He owned a small construction maintenance company, the kind that does subcontract work for property managers, repairs, emergency callouts, site cleanups, little rent-offs. It was a decent business when the market was steady. When it wasn't, it became this frantic juggling act where Dad would take whatever job he could and then blame everyone else when the numbers didn't work. Mom handled accounts in the sense that she knew the online banking password and could panic transfer money between accounts. Dean was supposed to be the next generation, Dad's pride, Dad's mini-me, but Dean mostly treated the business like an ATM with an attitude problem. That night, Dad sat back in his chair, tapped his fork against his plate, and said, "You know, if you really cared about family, you'd invest. You're doing well now." He said doing well like it was suspicious. Like success was something you owed taxes on directly to your parents. I'd recently gotten promoted, nothing insane, but enough that I could breathe. I worked in operations for a logistics company, the kind of job where you're paid to notice what's about to go wrong before it does. I'd spent years building stability because my childhood was basically the sound of my dad yelling into phones about late payments and cash flow. I didn't tell my parents my salary number. I told them I was comfortable. Apparently, comfortable is an invitation. I laughed awkwardly and said, "Invest in what?" Dad waved his hand. "New equipment. A second UTA. Maybe a bigger warehouse." He leaned forward, eyes bright with that dangerous optimism he gets when he's about to do something reckless. "We could really scale." Mom nodded like a bobblehead, immediately picturing a bigger kitchen, a bigger life. Dean said, "Yeah, imagine having 2 crews running at once," and grinned at me like I'd be funding his dream of not waking up early. I remember swallowing a mouthful of dry chicken and saying, "If you want to expand, you need a plan. You need a budget. You need..." Dad scoffed. "Here we go. The lecture." Mom smiled too sweetly and said, "She's just being practical," in the tone people use when they're embarrassed by you. Dean chimed in, "Don't stress. We're not asking you to run it. Just help." I didn't say yes that night. I didn't say no either. I did what I've always done. I deferred. I said, "Let's talk later because later feels safer than now when you're surrounded by people who've trained you to avoid conflict. After that, the later came in waves. Dad would bring it up in the car. Mom would bring it up over text with heart emojis. Dean would send memes about being broke. It was constant low-level pressure, like a thumb on the back of my neck. Then, 2 months after that dinner, Dad called me at lunchtime with his, "I'm calm, so you have to be calm" voice. "We need you to come by tonight," he said. "We've got something to show you." "What kind of something?" I asked, already feeling my stomach drop. "A proposal," he said, like they'd hired consultants and not just had a dramatic conversation in the lounge room. I arrived to find my parents' dining table covered in papers and printouts and what looked like an Excel spreadsheet that had been abused. Dad had highlighted random numbers in yellow like that made them true. Dean was there in a button-up shirt like he was going to court, which should have been my first clue that they were trying to look serious. Dad pointed at a column and said, "See, with this loan, we could buy the new UTA, pay off the supplier debt, and then we'll be up." I stared at the sheet. "What's the interest rate?" I asked. Dad blinked. "Doesn't matter. It's manageable." "It matters," I said, "because I'm annoying like that." Mom sighed. "You always focus on the negative." Dean leaned back, arms behind his head. "We just need you to be on board." It wasn't until Mom casually said, "And it would just be in your name because yours is clean," that the room tilted. I remember my skin going cold. "In my name," I repeated. Dad waved a hand. "Not the loan itself, just the guarantee. Banks want security. They don't trust small business owners." Mom added quickly, "But it's still our responsibility. You're just helping. Helping. That word in my family means you take the risk so we can take the benefit." I told them I needed time to think. Dad got angry. Mom cried. Dean called me selfish. Same pattern, different day. I left with my heart hammering, and on the drive home, I kept seeing my name typed on those documents like it was a leash. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened my laptop and started doing the thing I do when I'm scared. I look for facts. I pull my credit report. And that's where the story stopped being, "My family is pressuring me," and turned into, "My family is actively scheming." There were inquiries I didn't recognize. Multiple. A bank. A finance company. A business lender. All in the last 6 weeks. I stared at the screen, so hard my eyes watered. My name. My file. My history. People have been shopping my credit around like a product. My mouth went dry. I felt sick in that specific way you feel when you realize someone has been in your house when you weren't home. I called the first lender listed and said, "Hi, there's an inquiry on my credit file." I didn't apply for anything. The woman on the phone was polite in that corporate way and said, "We have an application under your name." "I didn't submit it," I said, and my voice sounded too loud in my quiet apartment. She asked security questions. I answered. She paused. "It was submitted online," she said, "using your email." "My email," I repeated, and my fingers went numb. "Which email?" She read it out. It was not my email. It was an email address that looked like mine with one extra letter. Close enough to fool someone skimming. Close enough to be deliberate. I hung up and just sat there on my couch, staring at my wall, listening to my own breathing. My hands were shaking, but my brain was weirdly calm, like it had switched into survival mode. I didn't cry yet. Crying felt like a luxury. I froze my credit the next morning. I changed every password. I added 2-factor authentication. I called my bank and flagged my accounts. I didn't tell my parents because I didn't want them to have time to rewrite the story. I wanted to walk in with facts, not feelings. That's how I ended up back in their kitchen on a Saturday afternoon, standing at the island while Mom slid the envelope toward me like this was just the next step. They tried to dress it up as a family discussion, but the moment I saw my name on that guarantee page, all I could hear was those inquiries rattling around my head like coins. When I said no, Mom's face went pinched. Dad's voice turned sharp immediately. "What do you mean no?" "I mean no," I said, and I could feel my voice shaking, but I kept going anyway. "And I know you've already applied for things under my name." Silence. Real silence. Even Dean stopped pretending. Mom blinked rapidly. "What are you talking about?" Dad's eyes narrowed. "Don't accuse us of—" I pulled my credit report, I said, and my hands finally stopped shaking because anger is steadier than fear. There are inquiries I didn't authorize. There's an email address pretending to be mine. Dean let out a short laugh, but it was nervous. You're being paranoid. No, I said, looking straight at him. You're being sloppy. Mom's voice rose, high and wounded. We would never do that to you. Dad slammed his palm on the bench, so hard the papers jumped. Enough, he snapped. We're trying to save this family. You think your little job makes you above us? You think you could just stand there and judge? My stomach flipped, but my feet stayed planted. I said, you're not saving the family. You're trying to use me to save your business and your pride. Mom's eyes filled with tears instantly, her favorite emergency exit. After everything we've done for you, she whispered. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. You didn't do this for me, I said. You did it to me. Dean finally spoke, voice tight. If you don't sign, we lose the warehouse, he said. Dad said. I don't care what Dad said. I snapped, surprising myself with the heat in my voice. You don't get to gamble with my future. Dad leaned forward, eyes hard. If you walk away, don't come crying when this family collapses. Something in me went very still. The old me would have folded right there. The old me would have signed just to stop the tension, just to get Dad's approval, just to keep Mom from crying. But the version of me who'd sat up at 3 a.m. staring at unauthorized credit checks had changed. I'm not walking away, I said. I'm stepping back so you can't drag me down. Mom sobbed. Dean swore under his breath. Dad stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Then I did the thing that made them actually pause. I pulled out my phone and said, I've already frozen my credit. If you try again, it'll flag. And if my identity gets used, I will report it. Dad's face went purple. You do that to your own family? I held his gaze. You already did it to me. I left. I drove home with my hands shaking again, not from fear this time, but from adrenaline. When I got home, I sat in my car for 10 minutes, just breathing like my body had run a marathon while my mouth said 4 sentences. The fallout was immediate and messy. Mom sent me long messages about betrayal and loyalty. Dad left voicemails where he sounded like he was spitting the words. Dean posted vague stuff on Instagram about snakes and people who forget where they came from. My aunt called and said, your mother is beside herself, like that was my job to fix. And for a few days, I did wobble. I won't pretend I was some boundary queen who slept peacefully. I felt sick. I felt guilty. I kept thinking, what if they really lose everything? And it's because I said no. That thought crept in at night like a draft under a door. Then I remembered something I'd learned the hard way. If someone is willing to ruin you to save themselves, they will never stop at one ask. They'll keep taking until you have nothing left, and then they'll blame you for being empty. So I stayed firm. But the schemes didn't stop. They just changed shape. A week later, Mom invited me to coffee. Neutral ground. Public. She picked a cafe she liked where the staff knew her name, because Mom loves an audience even when she's pretending she doesn't. She arrived already crying. Not subtle tears. Full trembling chin. People looked over. I hated it immediately. I don't know who you are anymore, she whispered, gripping her latte like it was a lifeline. I sat down slowly and said, I'm the same person. I'm just not saying yes. Mom's eyes flashed. Your father is struggling, she said. We're all struggling. I know, I said, and I'm not adding my life to the pile. She leaned in, lowering her voice dramatically. There's another way, she said. If you won't sign, you could just transfer us some money. A loan. We'll pay you back. How much? She hesitated, then said a number that made my stomach lurch. That's not a loan, I said. That's you asking me to absorb your failure. Mom's face twisted. Failure, she hissed. How dare you? I didn't raise my voice. I just said, Mom, you tried to use my identity. You don't get to call this love. She stared at me like she wanted to slap me. Then she wiped her tears and did something that, weirdly, hurt more than the anger. She smiled. The sweet smile. The one that says she's switched tactics. Fine, she said softly. If you won't help us, you won't be part of the benefits when things get better. The benefits? I echoed. Mom tapped her nails on the table. Your father's been talking, she said. About the will. About who gets what. You want to be independent? Great. Be independent. There it was. The threat dressed up as principle. The idea that inheritance was a leash they could yank any time I didn't behave. I felt my face go hot, but I stayed still. Okay, I said. Mum blinked. Okay. Okay, I repeated. You can do what you want with your will. Her mouth opened, then closed. She hadn't expected me to accept it. She'd expected me to panic. She'd expected me to scramble for position. Instead, I took a sip of my coffee, bitter, burnt, and said, I'm not signing anything and I'm not giving you money. If you want actual help, I'll help you make a budget and talk to a financial counselor. But I'm not being your rescue rope. Mum's eyes hardened. So you really are choosing money over family. I set my cup down carefully. No, I said, I'm choosing safety over manipulation. I got up and left her sitting there with her latte and her shocked expression, and my hand was shaking again, but I didn't turn back. Here's where the came out on top part actually starts, even though it didn't feel like winning at the time. Because once I stopped participating in the chaos, I started seeing how much of my life had been shaped around their emergencies. My weekends were freer. My savings started growing instead of leaking. My nervous system, this constant, humming stress I normalized, started to quiet down. And then something unexpected happened. The business started wobbling harder. Not because I refused to sign, because it was already wobbling. I just wasn't propping it up anymore. Dad couldn't get the loan without my guarantee. Suppliers tightened terms. The warehouse lease became a problem. A couple of their subcontractors quit because payments were late. Mum started texting me like a broken record. We just need a little bridge. Just a little help. Dean tried his own angle. He showed up at my apartment unannounced one night, put up like he was a teenager sneaking out. He knocked like he owned the door. I opened it with the chain still on because I'd learned paranoia is sometimes just pattern recognition. Dean put on his best wounded little brother face. Can we talk? He said. I didn't move. About what? He sighed dramatically. Look, I know things got messy, but Dad's not wrong. We need family. I stared at him. You mean you need me? Dean flinched like I'd slapped him with honesty. Don't do that, he snapped. Don't twist my words. Then say what you mean, I said. He ran a hand over his face, and for a split second, I saw real stress under his bravado. That they're going to lose everything, he said quietly. Mum's freaking out. Dad's drinking more. It's bad. My chest tightened. Not because I wanted to fold. Because a part of me still loved them, still wanted to stop the bleeding. Dean leaned closer, voice lowering. If you sign, we can fix it, he said. We'll take you seriously. I swear. You'll be part of it. You'll have a stake. I stared at him through the gap in the chain. You're offering me a stake in a sinking ship, I said. Dean's eyes flashed. So you're just going to watch us drown? I felt my throat tighten. You're the one holding the anchor, I said. Drop it. He scoffed. You think you're so smart. I think you're scared, I said, and my voice softened despite myself. And I'm sorry, but I'm not signing. And if you keep trying to force it, I'll take it further. Dean's face changed. Anger, then something like panic. You wouldn't, he whispered. I held his gaze. Try me, I said. He stepped back like he'd hit a wall, then hissed, You're not family, and stormed down the stairs. I closed the door, leaned my forehead against it, and breathed until the shaking stopped. A month later, my aunt called me and said, Your father wants to meet. Properly. No jilling. I laughed once, humorless. Does he? Yes, she said. He's humbled. That word made my skin crawl, because in my family, it usually meant they'd run out of options. We met at a small office. Not a lawyer's office, not some dramatic boardroom. Just a rented meeting space at an accountant's building. Neutral. Fluorescent. Smelled like printer ink and stale carpet. Dad arrived looking older. Mum's eyes were puffy. Dean was sulking. There was an accountant there, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. She shook my hand and said, Thanks for coming. Her tone said she'd seen worse families than mine. Dad cleared his throat. We want to restructure, he said, avoiding my eyes. We need a plan. I almost said, You mean you need me? Instead, I said, What's the real situation? The accountant slid a file across the table. Actual numbers. Actual debt. Actual overdue obligations. I scanned it and felt my stomach drop. It was worse than I thought. Not just tight. It was bleeding. Dad said, quietly, "We can't keep going like this." Mom started crying again, but this time it wasn't performative. It looked tired. Dean muttered, "If she just signed." The accountant cut him off with a look. "No," she said crisply. "If you had managed your cash flow, we wouldn't be here." Silence. My whole body went still because no one ever talked to my brother like that. He opened his mouth, then closed it like a fish. Dad finally looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, jaw-tight. "We need help," he said, and it sounded like swallowing glass. I exhaled slowly. This was the fork in the road. The moment where the old me would jump in and fix everything and then get blamed later. The moment where the new me had to decide what helping actually meant. "I'll help," I said carefully, and Mum's face lifted like she'd been granted mercy. Dad's shoulders loosened slightly. "On my terms," I added. Dad's face hardened immediately. "Here we go." "No," I said, staying calm. "This isn't a power play. This is reality. I'm not guaranteeing loans. I'm not putting my name on debt. I'm not transferring cash into a black hole. But I will help you restructure and negotiate and build a plan. If you give me full visibility and you stop making decisions without numbers." Dean scoffed. Dad bristled. Mum looked like she wanted to say yes to anything to stop the pain. The accountant nodded slowly. "That's reasonable," she said. Dad's jaw worked. "And what do you get out of it?" he asked, suspicious. I almost laughed again. "Peace," I said, "and Nana's security." That made Mum flinch, because Nana, my grandmother, had been quietly helping them for years too, giving little amounts that added up. I found out recently, and it made me furious. Nana lived on a fixed income. She shouldn't have been funding my dad's pride. I continued, "You stop taking money from Nana. You stop guilt-tripping her. You stop treating her like your emergency fund." Dad's face went tight. "Mum offered. She offered because she loves you," I said. "Not because it's okay." Mum whispered, "We didn't mean." "I know," I said, "and I meant it in the way you mean I know you don't think about consequences until they hit you." The accountant laid out options. Sell the warehouse lease, downgrade equipment, renegotiate supplier terms, stop underquoting, restructure staff, and this was the big one. Dean needed to stop drawing money like it was his personal salary without doing actual work. Dean exploded at that. "So it's all my fault now?" he snapped, eyes flashing toward me like I was the villain. I didn't snap back. I just said, "It's everyone's responsibility. But yes, you're part of the problem." His face went red. Mum made a strangled sound. Dad stared at the table. That meeting didn't end with hugs. It ended with tense agreement and bitterness and my parents treating my boundaries like insults. But it ended with something else too. A plan, real steps, real timelines, real accountability. Over the next 3 months, I did what I said I'd do. I helped negotiate. I created a cash flow tracker. I made them face the numbers. I helped them stop the bleeding. And here's the part that surprised even me. My dad started listening. Not because he suddenly respected me as a daughter, because he didn't have a choice. When a fantasy collapses, the practical person becomes valuable. Dean, meanwhile, couldn't handle it. He hated being told no more than he hated being broke. He skipped meetings. He argued with the accountant. He sulked. He kept trying to go around me and talk Dad into one more loan. It was pathetic and infuriating. Then, one afternoon, I got an alert from my credit monitoring, another inquiry attempt. Blocked because of the freeze. My hands went cold. I called the lender, confirmed it was an application attempt under my name again, and hung up with that sick, hollow feeling in my gut. I drove straight to my parents' place. No warning. No pelaitnis. I walked into their kitchen like a storm because I was done being gentle. Dad looked up, startled. Mum was folding laundry. Dean was on the couch with his phone. "Who tried to apply for credit in my name again?" I asked, voice flat. Mum blinked. "What?" I turned to Dean. "Was it you?" I asked. Dean laughed. "You're crazy." I pulled my phone out and showed him the alert. His eyes flicked to it too fast, too sharp. Dad stood up. "What's going on?" I said, "Someone tried again. Today. So either you tell me the truth right now, or I report it. I'm not warning you again." Mum's face went pale. "Don't say things like that," she whispered. Dean stood up, suddenly furious. "Fine," he snapped. "Yes, I tried. Because you're being a tyrant and Dad's business is dying and you're acting like you're better than us. Dad's face went white. Mom made a sound like she'd been punched. I stared at Dean, and something in me finally snapped cleanly, not in a rage-wise way, in a clarity way. You would ruin my life, I said quietly, to avoid facing your own choices. Dean sneered. Oh my God, stop being dramatic. I looked at my dad. You need to hear this, I said, voice shaking now. He will do it again. He will keep doing it. He doesn't care about consequences. Dad looked between us, jaw clenched, eyes wet in that angry way. Dean, he said low, is that true? Dean shrugged, like he was bored. It would have fixed everything if she'd just cooperated. That shrug was the final proof. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just pulled my phone up, opened my notes app, and said, I'm calling the bank's fraud department. And I'm telling the accountant. And I'm stepping away unless you remove him from any access. Mom lunged toward me, crying. Please don't, she begged. Please, please, we're finally getting stable. I looked at her, tears burning behind my eyes. Stable doesn't mean safe, I said. Not with him. Dad's face tightened like he was swallowing humiliation. He looked at Dean and said, through clenched teeth, give me your keys. Your laptop. Your login. Dean scoffed. Are you serious? Yes, Dad snapped. Now, for the first time in my life, I watched my father choose reality over ego. It wasn't noble. It was desperate, but it was a choice. Dean threw his keys on the counter like a tantrum. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the photo frames rattled. Mom collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Dad stood there shaking, staring at the counter like he didn't know what to do with the grief of his golden boy being a liability. I should have felt victorious. I didn't. I felt exhausted. I felt sad. I felt like I just cut a rotten branch off a tree. I still wanted to survive. That night, I did report the attempt. I had to. I needed a paper trail. I needed protection. I also told the accountant because secrecy is where my family's schemes grow. The aftermath was brutal. Dean told relatives I was destroying the family. Mom stopped talking to me for a week, then called crying, then stopped again. Dad oscillated between rage and shame. Nana, sweet Nana, held my hand at her kitchen table and said, you did the right thing. And I cried then because hearing it out loud from someone who mattered finally cracked the dam. So how did I come out on top? Not because my family begged forgiveness. They didn't. Not because I got some dramatic revenge scene. Life isn't that tidy. I came out on top because I didn't let them drag me into the hole with them. The business survived, barely, after downsizing and restructuring. Dad learned, painfully, what numbers actually mean. Mom stopped handling accounts and started following an actual budget because the accountant forced it. Dean moved in with a friend and tried to start his own thing, which lasted about 6 weeks before he realized adult life doesn't respond to vibes. And me? I kept my credit intact. I kept my savings. I bought my own small place a few months later, nothing flashy but mine. I slept through the night for the first time in years without waking up to a panic thought about someone using my identity. I visited Nana more. I started therapy because apparently I enjoy spending money on learning how not to be a family emergency tool. The weirdest part is that Dad eventually started calling me for advice without the mocking tone. Not warm, not apologetic, but quieter, like the volume of his ego had finally been turned down by consequences. One day he said, awkwardly, you were right. I didn't throw it back in his face. I just said I know, because I didn't need him to crown me. I didn't need the family to clap. I needed to be safe. They schemed. They pushed. They tried guilt, threats, fake tears, and even outright fraud. And I fought back, not with screaming, not with dramatic exits, but with boundaries and evidence and the kind of stubborn consistency that people like my family hate because it doesn't bend. I didn't come out on top because I won against them. I came out on top because I stopped letting their chaos be the boss of my life.